No one in that courtroom could believe what they just heard. A federal judge had just questioned Jasmine Crockett's attitude, and what happened next silenced the entire room.
The courtroom was buzzing with tension long before the session even began. You could feel it, that heavy, electric kind of silence that builds before something big happens. The air was thick with whispers, the clicking of camera shutters, and the soft rustle of papers. Every seat was filled. Even the back corners, where interns and journalists squeezed together, were packed. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing, not when Judge Edith Jones and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett were about to share the same space. Judge Jones had a reputation, a legend really. She was known for her discipline, her unforgiving intellect, and a tone that could silence even the most confident lawyer in seconds. She'd been on the bench for decades, shaping rulings that defined careers and crushed egos. And then there was Jasmine Crockett, the rising star, the voice of the people, the woman who refused to be quiet when something felt wrong. A congresswoman, a lawyer, and a fighter all rolled into one. She had become a symbol of bold truth-telling, the kind of woman who said what others only thought. So, when she walked through the grand oak doors that morning, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a drumbeat. Her stride was calm, confident, not arrogant, just sure of herself. She didn't need to announce her arrival. People turned instinctively, as if drawn by the gravity she carried with her. She wore her signature look, bold glasses, a crisp, bright blazer, and that unshakable calm that made people either admire her or fear her. Her eyes scanned the room, steady and observant, taking in every detail, from the judge's bench to the row of reporters waiting to catch her next move. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke volumes. It said, "I've faced tougher rooms than this." It said, "I'm ready, let's do this." And yet, what happened next, no one saw coming. When Judge Edith Jones entered, the courtroom immediately stood. Her robe flowed behind her like a curtain of authority. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and began flipping through her notes with deliberate precision. Then, without looking up, she spoke. Her voice was steady, the kind that filled the room effortlessly. "Miss Crockett," she began, pausing just long enough for the tension to grow. "Many here admire your passion, but some have questioned your attitude, whether it belongs in a place of law and order." The words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. The courtroom froze. The gallery stopped breathing. Even the sound of the ceiling fan seemed to fade. Reporters' eyes widened. Pens stopped moving. The cameras, already recording, zoomed in to catch every flicker of Jasmine's face. Judge Jones wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. Her words carried a challenge, not just about behavior, but about identity, about what kind of person deserved to be respected in a courtroom. For a moment, Jasmine didn't respond. She just stood there, motionless, silent. Her hand rested lightly on the table, her fingers brushing the edge of her notes. You could almost see the thoughts running through her mind, 1,000 ways she could answer, 1,000 reasons to stay calm. Everyone expected her to soften her tone, to play it safe. That's what most people did in front of Judge Jones. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't most people. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 3. Then she lifted her head, slowly, deliberately. Her gaze met the judge's, steady, unflinching, and in a voice calm enough to make every ear in the room lean forward, she said, "Your Honor, if by attitude you mean the refusal to stay silent in the face of unfairness, then yes, I have one, and I plan to keep it." You could hear gasps from the back row. Someone dropped a pen. The court reporter, who had seen hundreds of hearings, looked up from her machine for the first time in years. Even Judge Jones blinked, not out of anger, but out of surprise. There was no arrogance in Jasmine's tone, no shouting, no defiance, just calm conviction. Her words didn't attack, they illuminated. And that's what made them so powerful. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. It wasn't awkward, it was respectful. The kind of silence that comes when truth lands too close to the heart. Judge Jones adjusted her glasses again. For a moment, her eyes softened. Barely noticeable, but enough for those watching closely to catch it. "Miss Crockett," she said slowly, "you do realize this is a courtroom, not a campaign stage." Jasmine nodded, her voice steady as ever. "Yes, Your Honor, but justice doesn't stop at the courtroom doors." And with that, the tension broke, not with anger, but with admiration. Even the judge couldn't hide a faint approving smile before continuing the session. But everyone in that room knew something had shifted. Because on that day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak as a lawyer or a congresswoman. She spoke as a woman who refused to shrink herself to fit anyone's idea of respectability. And that, more than anything, is what shocked the courtroom.
Instead of reacting defensively, Jasmine stood tall. She didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply gathered her papers, tapped them once against the desk to straighten the edges, and lifted her chin. The movement was calm, deliberate, almost royal. Every camera in the courtroom shifted toward her. Even the murmurs in the gallery faded into silence. Then, in a voice clear enough to slice through the thick tension, she spoke. "Your Honor," she said softly, "if by attitude you mean my refusal to stay silent when injustice walks free, then yes, I have one, and I plan to keep it." The words hit like a spark in dry air. For half a second, no one breathed. Then came a ripple, a wave of whispers rolling from the front benches to the very back. A few reporters exchanged glances and began typing furiously, their fingers racing across keyboards as if afraid to miss a single syllable. The sound of clicking keys filled the air. One journalist whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Another nodded, eyes wide. Even Judge Edith Jones, who was famous for her iron composure, paused mid-note. Her pen hovered above the paper, ink bleeding into a small dot. She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. Jasmine, meanwhile, remained perfectly still, not challenging, not defensive, simply present. She knew the weight of every word she had just spoken. She could feel the energy in the room shift, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Judge Jones leaned back in her high chair, the wooden frame creaking softly. Her sharp eyes narrowed, studying the woman before her. "Miss Crockett," she said finally, her tone clipped but controlled, "this courtroom values respect, not rebellion." A hush fell again. But Jasmine didn't shrink from the moment. She tilted her head slightly, and a faint smile appeared. Not arrogance, but understanding. The kind of smile that said, "I've heard this before." "Respect," she said gently, "isn't about silence, it's about truth. And sometimes the truth has to speak loud enough to be heard." The courtroom felt it, that quiet explosion of power, the kind that doesn't come from volume, but from conviction. Judge Jones froze. Her hand tightened around her pen, but her face betrayed a flicker of something rare, surprise. For the first time, perhaps in years, she wasn't the only one in control of the room. In the back row, an older attorney whispered to his colleague, "That was bold." His colleague replied, "Bold? That was history." The court stenographer's fingers stumbled over the keys, momentarily breaking rhythm. Even she couldn't help glancing up to witness what was unfolding. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were already being uploaded online. Phones buzzed quietly under tables as reporters sent messages. Crockett clashes with Judge Jones. Courtroom stunned. By the time the recess bell rang, #Attitude of Justice was already trending across social media. The short 30-second clip of Jasmine's words spread like wildfire. Her calm tone, her unflinching stare, her final line replayed again and again. Respect isn't about silence, it's about truth. People everywhere were talking. Some called her fearless, others reckless.
But almost everyone agreed. No one had seen anything like it. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. News vans lined the street. Microphones waited at the exit doors like soldiers ready for orders. Commentators were already preparing their headlines. Jasmine Crockett redefines respect in courtroom showdown. Judge Edith Jones meets her match. Inside, Judge Jones remained seated, her gavel untouched. For a moment, she simply watched Jasmine. And behind her stern gaze, there was something deeper. Not anger, but recognition. Perhaps she saw a younger version of herself, a woman once told she was too opinionated, too assertive for the bench. A woman who, like Jasmine, had learned the hard way that strength in a woman often gets mistaken for defiance. Jasmine, sensing the judge's eyes on her, met her gaze with calm respect. There was no smirk, no challenge, just quiet confidence. And that, more than anything, shifted the energy in the room. Judge Jones exhaled softly and said, "Proceed, Miss Crockett." The simple words felt monumental. Permission, yes, but also acknowledgement. As the hearing continued, something had changed. The audience leaned in, the judge listened more closely, and Jasmine spoke with the kind of measured power that can't be taught. Her voice carried not just arguments, but meaning. Every word felt deliberate, not to win the case, but to remind the room why justice matters. Later, when the clip made its way across the internet, people didn't just see a courtroom exchange. They saw a lesson. A reminder that respect isn't submission, and that dignity can coexist with defiance. For many watching at home, it wasn't just Jasmine's words that inspired them. It was her composure, her poise, the quiet courage to stand in front of authority and say, "I'm not here to disrupt, I'm here to be heard." That day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend a case, she defined a generation. And in the echo of her words, even Judge Edith Jones couldn't help but nod, ever so slightly, as if to admit, truth, when spoken with respect, is the highest form of justice.
To understand why that exchange between Judge Edith Jones and Jasmine Crockett mattered so much, you have to know Jasmine's story. Because what happened in that courtroom wasn't just a verbal sparring match. It was the meeting of two worlds, two philosophies, two eras, and two women shaped by struggle in very different ways. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever became a congresswoman, before cameras followed her every move and her speeches went viral, she was a defense attorney, standing in courtrooms where no one else wanted to stand. She didn't come from money. She didn't come from privilege. She came from a small town where justice often depended on who you were, not what was right. And she saw it, the quiet unfairness that lingered in the corners of the system. So when she chose law, she didn't do it for prestige or power. She did it because she believed the courtroom was supposed to be the one place where truth had a voice, even if it was small, even if it trembled. But the world of law isn't kind to those who speak too boldly, especially women who don't hide behind polite restraint. From the beginning, Jasmine was told she was too much, too emotional, too loud, too direct, too passionate. But every time someone called her too much, she thought of the client sitting beside her, the single mothers, the wrongly accused teenagers, the men who couldn't afford bail for crimes they didn't commit. Who was going to speak for them if she didn't? There were days she went home exhausted after hours of facing judges who dismissed her, colleagues who underestimated her, and clients who'd lost faith in a system designed to forget them. Yet she never gave up. Her voice became her weapon, sharp, passionate, unwavering. And with time, people began to notice. Local newspapers started calling her the woman who never backs down. Her peers started whispering, "She doesn't just argue, she believes." And that was true. Jasmine didn't fight to win, she fought to make things right. When she eventually ran for Congress, she carried that same fire into politics. She became known for her unfiltered honesty, the kind of truth-telling that made the powerful uncomfortable. But she didn't care about comfort.
She cared about change. On the other side of the story was Judge Edith Jones, a woman who had spent decades on the bench, commanding respect through discipline, composure, and control. She was a product of an older era, one where emotions had no place in the courtroom, where decorum was law, and where strength was measured by silence and restraint. In her world, a judge's word was final. The courtroom was sacred, untouchable by politics, activism, or personal feelings. To her, passion was dangerous. It clouded judgment. Order was everything. Judge Jones had built her reputation on that philosophy. She had mentored young lawyers, shaped the standards of conduct, and upheld tradition with an almost unshakable belief that justice required distance, a cool, impartial kind of discipline that didn't bend for anyone. So when these two women met, one built by fire and the other by steel, the air between them could only ignite. Their meeting wasn't about a single case, it was about two ideologies colliding head-on. On one side stood Jasmine Crockett, the voice of modern justice, a woman who believed that empathy was not weakness and that silence in the face of injustice was betrayal. On the other stood Judge Edith Jones, the guardian of the old order, believing that emotion must never outweigh law, that a courtroom's strength lay in its control. In her world, a judge's word was final. The courtroom was sacred, untouchable by politics, activism, or personal feelings. To her, passion was dangerous. It clouded judgment. Order was everything. Judge Jones had built her reputation on that philosophy. She had mentored young lawyers, shaped the standards of conduct, and upheld tradition with an almost unshakable belief that justice required distance, a cool, impartial kind of discipline that didn't bend for anyone. So when these two women met, one built by fire and the other by steel, the air between them could only ignite. Their meeting wasn't about a single case, it was about two ideologies colliding head-on. On one side stood Jasmine Crockett, the voice of modern justice, a woman who believed that empathy was not weakness and that silence in the face of injustice was betrayal. On the other stood Judge Edith Jones, the guardian of the old order, believing that emotion must never outweigh law, that a courtroom's strength lay in its control. It was a clash of worlds, tradition versus transformation, order versus passion, discipline versus defiance. Neither woman was wrong, they just saw justice through different lenses. Jasmine believed justice breathed, Judge Jones believed it stood still. And that's what made their encounter so powerful. Because beneath the tension, beneath the sharp words exchanged across the courtroom, there was an undeniable current of respect, the kind that only exists between two people who recognize the same fire in each other. When Jasmine answered the judge's challenge with calm conviction, when she said, "Respect isn't about silence, it's about truth," it wasn't just a response, it was a statement born from her entire life. From every client she defended, from every time she was told to tone down, from every moment she had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously. And Judge Jones, in that moment, saw it. She didn't say it out loud, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of understanding. Because deep down, even the judge knew, without people like Jasmine, people who dared to speak when others stayed silent, the courtroom she protected so fiercely would lose the very soul it was built to defend. That's why that exchange mattered. It wasn't just about one woman's attitude. It was about what happens when courage meets tradition, when two powerful women shaped by different worlds remind everyone watching that justice isn't a single voice. It's a conversation between strength and compassion. And on that day, in that courtroom, both spoke loudly.
After Jasmine Crockett's bold reply, a heavy silence gripped the courtroom. It wasn't the awkward kind of silence, it was charged, electric. Every person in that room knew they had just witnessed something rare, something bigger than legal argument or political debate. It felt personal. It felt historic. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Pens stopped moving. The courtroom reporter's hands hovered above her keys, waiting, as if afraid the next word might shatter the spell. No one dared to move. Jasmine stood there, still and poised, her gaze fixed on Judge Edith Jones, not out of defiance, but respect. She wasn't trying to win a fight. She was standing in her truth. And across the bench, the judge, known for her unshakable discipline, her unbending demeanor, looked thoughtful. Her expression softened, just slightly, as if something inside her had been stirred. Then, finally, Judge Jones broke the silence. She shifted in her high-backed chair, adjusting the heavy folds of her black robe. The movement was slow, deliberate, the kind of pause that commands attention. When she spoke, her voice no longer carried the chill of authority. It was softer, warmer, human. "You remind me," she said quietly, "of myself when I started." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, quiet gasps, soft whispers. The judge continued, her tone steady but reflective. "I was told I was too opinionated, too assertive. I didn't fit the image of what a judge should be. I was called difficult, ambitious, unruly." She let out a faint breath, almost a laugh, though it carried more weariness than humor. "Maybe I called it discipline. You call it fire. Either way, it's rare." The words hung there, heavy with meaning. For a woman like Judge Jones, known for never letting her guard down, this was more than a statement. It was a confession, a glimpse into her past, into battles she had fought decades ago, battles that mirrored Jasmine's, though they had worn different faces and different names. The courtroom, once thick with tension, now felt strangely intimate. Even the reporter stopped typing. Cameras continued rolling, but no one dared interrupt. In that moment, it wasn't about power or pride. It was about understanding. Two women, generations apart, recognizing the same struggle through different lenses. Jasmine's face softened. The fire in her eyes didn't fade, but it flickered with gratitude. She nodded slightly, humbled yet composed. "Then maybe, Your Honor," she said gently, "it's time both can exist, discipline and fire, side by side." The judge's eyes held hers for a long moment. It wasn't a stare-down, it was mutual respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that both were right in their own ways. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Judge Jones' lips. It was subtle, but to those who knew her, it was monumental. She gave a small, approving nod. "Miss Crockett," she said softly, "you may continue." And just like that, the wall between them broke. For a heartbeat, the courtroom stayed silent, as if no one wanted to disturb what had just happened. Then, from the back rows, a quiet sound began to spread, the faint rustle of hands clapping softly. One person started it, then another, until a gentle wave of applause filled the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't defiant, it was respectful, a quiet salute to courage, to honesty, and to the power of dialogue. The bailiff, surprised but professional, stepped forward and restored order. "Please, no applause in the courtroom," he said firmly. But the message had already been sent, loud and clear. Outside, word of the exchange spread quickly. Those who had been there couldn't stop talking about it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Two powerful women had disagreed, challenged each other, and still found respect in the middle of it all. For many watching, it was a moment of balance, proof that strength and grace didn't have to exist on opposite sides. Inside the room, Jasmine sat down, her heart still steady but full. She had spoken her truth, and it had been heard. Across the bench, Judge Jones returned to her notes, but her expression lingered, thoughtful, maybe even proud.
For the first time in a long while, she had seen a reflection of her younger self, bold, determined, unwilling to yield to the world's expectations. As the proceedings continued, a quiet understanding remained between them. There was no rivalry anymore, only respect. And perhaps that was the true lesson of that day. That justice isn't just about rules or passion, it's about the rare moments when both can coexist. When discipline meets fire, when authority listens to courage, and when truth, spoken boldly but respectfully, can bridge even the widest gap between generations. That day, in that courtroom, two women didn't just argue about justice, they embodied it.
The next morning, the courtroom clash between Judge Edith Jones and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had become the talk of the nation. Clips from the exchange looped endlessly on every major news network. Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube lit up with debates. Commentators filled panels arguing over one question: had Jasmine been disrespectful or simply brave? But outside the studios, the people had already decided. Across social media, hashtags like Attitude of Justice, Jasmine versus Jones, and Fire with Discipline flooded timelines. Viewers from all walks of life, students, teachers, lawyers, and everyday citizens praised Jasmine for doing something that many had always wanted to see in a courtroom: speaking truth without fear. "I've never seen someone stand that tall in front of a judge before," one user wrote. Another posted, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard." Within hours, Jasmine's quotes were being shared with inspiring background music and captions like, "Respect isn't silence, it's truth." Her calm, fearless words had become a modern symbol of confidence under pressure. In a follow-up interview the next evening, Jasmine appeared on a late-night talk show. She looked radiant, not glamorous, but grounded, like a woman who knew she had just sparked something bigger than herself. When the host asked her what was going through her mind during that tense exchange with Judge Jones, Jasmine smiled gently before replying, "People often mistake confidence for arrogance, especially when it comes from a woman who speaks her mind. But I've spent too many years defending people who were told to stay quiet. If I don't stand up in a courtroom, how can I expect anyone outside of it to?" The audience applauded. Some even stood up. Those words, simple yet powerful, became a rallying cry across the internet. By the next day, law students across the country were quoting Jasmine's reply in their classrooms. Clips of her speech were edited into motivational reels with lines like, "When truth speaks loud, justice listens." For young women studying law, her stance represented something long overdue: proof that empathy and assertiveness weren't opposites, they could coexist. Even her critics had to admit, Jasmine's composure had turned what could have been a confrontation into a conversation about integrity and voice. She didn't win by shouting, she won by standing firm. Meanwhile, Judge Edith Jones, usually private and reserved, surprised everyone again. Weeks after the hearing, she issued a brief public statement that read, "Sometimes justice needs a voice that refuses to whisper." That single line broke the internet. It was shared by journalists, activists, and even fellow judges who rarely engaged in public discourse. For many, it symbolized mutual respect, not rivalry, between two powerful women from different generations. Commentators began calling the moment the Dialogue of Dignity, a rare event where power met principle and both walked away stronger. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine received countless invitations to speak at universities and women's leadership events. She didn't treat the viral fame as a victory. Instead, she turned it into a message. During one speech, she told a crowd of young professionals, "Your attitude doesn't make you difficult, it makes you determined. Never apologize for caring too much about what's right." The audience erupted in applause, cameras flashed, and once again, the clip made its way across the internet, inspiring millions who never even heard her name before the courtroom encounter. By now, even those who had disagreed with her couldn't ignore the truth. That day, Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She redefined what strength could look like in a courtroom. She showed that confidence doesn't have to crush respect, and respect doesn't require silence. Her moment with Judge Jones became part of a bigger story, one about how justice evolves when people are brave enough to challenge how it looks and sounds. And as the headlines eventually faded, one thing remained unforgettable. Two women, one rooted in tradition, the other driven by transformation, met not as enemies, but as reflections of each other. Their exchange didn't divide people. It united them in one clear realization. Courage and respect aren't opposites. They're partners in the pursuit of truth. When future generations study that moment, they won't just remember a hearing. They'll remember the day Jasmine Crockett proved that even in the silence of a courtroom, one fearless voice can still echo across the nation.